Pregnant woman left to die in blizzard. Lakota warrior made her a promise that changed everything. The snow started falling softly in the early morning, blanketing the plains in a white layer that looked peaceful at first. The sky was gray and the air was cold but not unbearable. A pregnant woman was traveling alone, bundled in her coat and clutching a small pack. She had been walking for hours, following a rough trail across the frozen plains, hoping to reach a settlement before nightfall. She kept telling herself that she could do it, that she had to do it, but with each step the snow got deeper. The wind grew stronger, and her exhaustion increased. Her belly ached, her legs were sore, and her breath came in short, uneven bursts. She paused for a moment, pressing a gloved hand to her back and taking a deep breath. The cold air burned her lungs, but she pushed forward anyway. There was no choice. Stopping now could be dangerous, and she had promised herself that she would reach safety. The wind shifted suddenly, stronger this time, cutting through her layers of clothing like invisible knives. She hunched her shoulders and lowered her head, trying to shield her face from the stinging snow. Her feet sank into the snow with every step, making the journey even harder. She had hoped that the trail would be easy to follow, but the fresh snow had already covered most of her footprints. The plains looked empty, endless, and featureless. Nothing but white stretched as far as she could see. Panic began to creep in, soft and quiet at first, then growing with each gust of wind that made her stumble. She tried to push it aside, telling herself she had survived long walks in harsh weather before. But this storm felt different. There was a heaviness to it, a power she could not control. She slowed her pace, gripping her coat tighter and trying to focus on the path ahead. Each step required effort, and she could feel her muscles trembling under the strain. Her lips were blue and her fingers had grown numb, despite the thick gloves. Her mind raced with thoughts of what could happen if she didn't make it. The fear of losing herself or the child she carried was overwhelming. She whispered to her belly, speaking softly to the baby inside. "We will make it. Just hold on. We must keep moving." The words offered little comfort to herself, but she hoped that the small voice inside her would recognize her promise. Her steps became slower, more careful as she tried to maintain balance on the slippery, uneven ground. The snowstorm grew fiercer. The flakes fell faster and thicker, reducing her visibility to just a few feet. The sky seemed to press down on the land, heavy and dark. She could barely see the shapes in the distance, and the trail she had been following disappeared under a fresh layer of snow. Her exhaustion and fear made her legs feel like lead. Every step was painful, every breath a struggle. She wanted to cry out, to scream, but the cold seemed to steal her voice. Instead, she gritted her teeth and kept moving, hoping that she could find some shelter or a familiar landmark. Her body began to shiver uncontrollably. She could feel the cold creeping into her bones, making every movement more difficult. Her head felt heavy, and her vision blurred slightly as fatigue set in. She stumbled, almost falling face first into the snow, but caught herself just in time. She dropped to her knees for a moment, pressing her hands into the cold snow to steady herself. The pain in her back and abdomen grew sharper, a reminder that the baby inside her needed care and attention. She gritted her teeth and forced herself to rise again, every movement taking more effort than the last. She whispered to herself, "Keep going. Don't give up. We can survive this." As the day wore on, the storm grew stronger. The wind howled across the plains, pushing her forward, then back, making every step uncertain. Her coat, once thick and protective, was soaked with snow and cold. Her gloves no longer fully protected her fingers, which ached with numbness. Her boots were wet, making her feet heavy and painful. Every step felt like a battle. Every gust of wind seemed determined to throw her off balance. Her hope wavered, but she refused to let it go completely. Suddenly, she heard a sound faint and distant, almost lost in the roar of the wind. It was soft, almost imperceptible, but it made her pause. She turned her head, squinting through the snow. For a moment, she thought she had imagined it, but the sound came again, a faint, steady noise, almost like someone calling her name. She froze, unsure if it was real or a trick of her mind. Fear and hope tangled inside her chest. Could someone be nearby? Could someone see her struggling in the storm? She wanted to call out, but the cold air made her voice catch in her throat. At that same moment, a Lakota warrior was moving across the same frozen plains. He had traveled this land many times and knew the dangers that came with winter storms. His eyes scanned the horizon, trained to notice the smallest signs of movement or disturbance in the snow. He had been seeking shelter himself, knowing that the storm could turn deadly at any moment. But something caught his attention. A small, uneven mark in the snow, unlike the natural patterns made by wind and drift. He paused, watching carefully, listening. A faint sound reached his ears, almost swallowed by the wind. It was the sound of human struggle. Without hesitation, he changed direction and moved toward it. The storm fought against him, pushing at his body, cutting through his clothing with sharp gusts. Yet he pressed on, guided by instinct and the knowledge that someone's life was in danger. Step by step, he approached the source of the sound, moving with care over the treacherous snowdrifts. The white plain stretched endlessly, but his focus never wavered. Every sense was alert, tuned to the smallest signs of human presence. Then he saw her, a dark shape against the endless white. She was on her knees, shivering, her face pale and frozen from exposure. Her lips were blue, her hands trembling, and her body curled as if to protect the life inside her. The warrior moved quickly, clearing snow from her face and calling out softly. She looked up, eyes wide with fear and disbelief. Her voice caught in her throat, but he reassured her gently, telling her she was not alone. He guided her carefully, offering support as she tried to rise. When he realized she was pregnant, his expression grew serious. The danger had increased, but he had already made a silent promise to himself. He would not let her die. Not her, not the child. He spoke softly, giving her instructions, helping her move slowly through the deep snow. Every step was deliberate, careful, designed to preserve her strength. The storm continued to rage around them, but in that moment, something powerful shifted. Hope, fragile but real, began to take hold. He built a small shelter from the snow, a temporary barrier to protect her from the worst gusts of wind. He wrapped her in additional layers, sharing his own warmth as best as he could. He whispered to her continuously, guiding her breathing, reminding her to stay awake and alert. Fear still clung to her, but his calm presence was a lifeline. She focused on his voice, on the small gestures that reminded her she was not alone. Together they formed a fragile bond, one forged in extreme conditions and grounded in trust and determination. Hours passed. The woman's exhaustion was profound, but she continued to move forward under his careful guidance. Every step was measured. Every pause was for rest or warmth. She clung to him as the wind threatened to knock her down, trusting his strength and knowledge to guide them to safety. The storm was relentless, yet the warrior's determination never wavered. He had made a promise, and he intended to keep it, no matter the cost. By nightfall, the blizzard showed no signs of stopping. The woman's strength was nearly gone, her breath shallow, her limbs trembling with fatigue. But the warrior remained calm. He spoke softly, encouraging her, offering reassurance that each step forward was progress. The snow fell thicker, the wind stronger, but hope remained. He held her hand when she faltered, supporting her weight, sharing warmth, and guiding her every movement. The promise he had made in the heart of the storm became the driving force for survival. She whispered to him softly, tears freezing on her cheeks, barely able to speak. I don't know if I can. He shook his head gently, smiling through the cold. You can. We can. You are not alone. We will survive this. And with that, he lifted her carefully, helping her continue the journey across the endless white. Each step was difficult, each moment a battle against the storm, but life continued to push forward. The night deepened, the storm intensified, yet they kept moving. He guided her, protected her, and reminded her with every word and gesture that the promise he had made would never break. She clung to the small hope that his presence gave her. Step by step, breath by breath, they pressed on. The storm could rage all it wanted, but it could not take away determination, courage, or the bond that had formed between them. In the endless white against the cold and wind, hope had taken root, and that hope, fragile yet unyielding, was their lifeline. The wind arrived first, quiet and almost gentle, like a warning that no one noticed. Snow had been falling since morning, light and harmless at first. The woman believed she could still make it before night. She wrapped her coat tighter around her growing belly and kept walking, telling herself that stopping was not an option. She was tired, very tired, but fear kept her moving. Fear for herself, and more than that, fear for the child she carried inside her. By afternoon, the sky had changed. What was once gray became heavy and dark, pressing down on the land. The open plain stretched in every direction, empty and silent, offering no shelter. The wind grew stronger, cutting through her clothes as if they were thin paper. Snow no longer drifted gently. It struck her face, sharp and stinging, forcing her to lower her head just to breathe. She tried to remember the path she had followed earlier, but the ground looked the same everywhere now. Snow covered her footprints almost as soon as she made them. Each step became harder than the last. Her legs shook. Her breath came in short, painful bursts. Still, she kept going. She told herself she could not stop. If she stopped, the cold would win. Pain tightened in her lower back. At first she ignored it, thinking it was only exhaustion. But the pain returned stronger this time, spreading through her body. She pressed a hand against her belly and whispered soft words, trying to calm herself and the child. Panic crept in, slow and heavy. This was not the time. This was not the place. The storm did not care. The wind screamed now, drowning out every other sound. Snow filled the air so completely that she could barely see her own hands. Her eyelashes froze together. Her fingers felt stiff and useless. She stumbled, nearly falling, then caught herself. Tears froze on her cheeks before they could fall. Her thoughts became scattered. She began to imagine warmth. Fire, walls, familiar voices. She shook her head hard, knowing that letting her mind drift could be dangerous. She needed to stay awake. She needed to stay alive. Another wave of pain hit her, stronger than before. She cried out, though no one could hear. Her knees buckled, and this time she did fall, landing hard on the snow. Cold rushed into her body instantly. She tried to push herself up, but her arms would not respond. Fear turned into something heavier, quiet despair. She lay there, staring at the white sky, breath shallow and uneven. The storm moved over her like a living thing, uncaring and endless. For the first time she allowed herself to think what she had been fighting all day. She might not survive this night. Not far away, moving against the storm with steady purpose, a Lakota warrior traveled across the same frozen land. He knew this weather well. He had grown up learning how the plains could change without warning, how the wind could turn deadly in moments. He should have been seeking shelter himself. Any sensible person would have. But something felt wrong. He paused, narrowing his eyes against the snow. Most people would see nothing but white chaos, but he had learned to read signs others missed. A broken pattern in the snow. A shape that did not belong. The faintest sound, almost swallowed by the wind. He turned his body into the storm and listened. There it was again. Not an animal, not the wind. A human sound, weak and fading. He did not think about danger. He did not weigh the risk. He moved. Step by step he pushed forward, following instinct and experience. The cold burned his skin. The wind fought him, trying to force him back. Still he continued, eyes scanning the ground. Then he saw her, a dark shape against the endless white. She was lying still, half covered by snow, her body curled as if trying to protect itself. He knelt beside her immediately, brushing snow from her face. Her skin was pale, lips trembling. When she opened her eyes, they were unfocused, filled with fear and disbelief. She tried to speak, but no words came. He spoke calmly, his voice low but firm, cutting through the storm. He told her she was not alone. He told her to stay awake. He placed a hand near her shoulder, grounding her, reminding her that she was still here. When he realized she was pregnant, his expression changed, not with fear, but with resolve. The storm howled around them, but in that moment, something shifted. He made a promise. Not loudly, not for anyone else to hear. A promise shaped by honor, by belief, by the understanding that life was sacred. She would not be left to die here. Neither would the child. He knew time was against them. He knew the storm could still claim both of them. But promises, once made, were not broken. The woman drifted in and out of awareness as he worked quickly but carefully. The cold had already taken much from her strength. He needed to protect her from the wind first. Using what the land offered, he built a small barrier, shaping the snow to block the worst of the storm. It was not much, but it helped. He wrapped her as tightly as he could, sharing warmth, steadying her breathing with calm words. She clung to the sound of his voice, though she did not understand every word. It did not matter. The tone alone told her something important. She was not being abandoned. The pain returned again, sharper now. Her face tightened, and fear flashed in her eyes. He saw it immediately. This was more than exposure. This was something else. He understood then that waiting too long could be just as dangerous as moving. Staying meant the cold would slowly take them. Moving meant facing the storm. Neither choice was safe, but only one offered a chance. He adjusted his position and spoke to her again, telling her they would move. He told her to hold on, to stay with him. She nodded weakly, trusting him without fully knowing why.
In moments like this, trust did not come from logic.
It came from necessity. He lifted her carefully, every movement controlled, protecting her body and the life inside her. The weight slowed him, but he did not stop. Each step was deliberate, guided by memory and instinct. He followed landmarks hidden beneath the snow, shapes only he could recognize. The storm fought him relentlessly. Wind tore at his clothing. Snow filled his mouth and eyes. His muscles burned, then went numb, then burned again. Still he moved forward. The woman moaned softly, gripping his arm when another wave of pain struck. He adjusted his pace, murmuring reassurance. He did not tell her everything would be fine. He did not make false promises. He told her only what mattered, that he would not leave her. At one point her head slumped against his chest. Panic flared, sharp and immediate. He stopped, pressing his forehead against hers, calling to her until her eyes opened again. The storm roared, but he refused to let it take her silently. Time lost meaning. Minutes felt like hours. Distance became impossible to measure. There was only movement, breath, and will. When the wind grew even stronger, he knew they could not continue much longer. He found a place where the land dipped slightly, offering small protection. It was not safety, but it was enough for now. He lowered her gently, shielding her again. Her breathing was uneven. Sweat mixed with freezing air. The pain in her body came in waves she could no longer control. Fear returned stronger than before. He understood what was happening. This was not how things were supposed to go. This place was wrong. The timing was wrong. But life does not wait for perfect conditions. He steadied himself, drawing on everything he had been taught, stories passed down through generations, knowledge shaped by survival, by winters harsher than this one. He stayed calm, because panic would help no one. He spoke softly, guiding her through each moment, helping her focus, helping her endure. The storm continued, indifferent and loud, but something else filled the space between them. Determination. She cried, not loudly, but with a deep, trembling sound that came from fear and effort combined. He stayed with her, fully present, refusing to let the world shrink down to pain alone. In that frozen hollow surrounded by wind and snow, two lives balanced on a thin line, and the promise he had made weighed heavier than the storm itself. The storm had not yet passed. The wind still tore across the plains, bending the snow into wild, swirling shapes that disappeared as quickly as they appeared. The woman was growing weaker. Every breath she took felt heavier than the last. Her body shivered uncontrollably, not from fear this time, but from cold and exhaustion. The pain in her belly was constant now, and it seemed to grow with each passing moment. She knew something was happening. She could feel it deep inside, a sharp, insistent warning that her body and the baby were in danger. She tried to speak, but her voice was barely a whisper. Her lips trembled, and the words never came out. The Lakota warrior recognized the signs immediately. He had seen women give birth before, though never in conditions like this. He had helped in emergencies, but nothing as desperate as this. The storm, the cold, and the snow made it almost impossible, but he had promised. That promise burned in him brighter than the fear he felt for what could happen. He would not fail. Not now. Not ever. He looked around quickly. The snow covered everything, erasing landmarks, hiding potential dangers. He needed a place that could give even a little shelter from the wind. A small rise, a hollow, even a mound of snow could serve as a temporary barrier. He found a dip in the frozen earth, just enough to shield them from the worst of the gusts. Carefully, he moved her there, laying her down gently. His hands were steady, though numb from the cold. He spoke softly, words meant to calm her, even if she could not fully understand them. His tone was the only anchor in this chaotic world. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours. The woman's eyes closed briefly, and her body tensed with the contractions that came faster and harder. Each one stole more of her strength, and each one terrified him. He could feel her fear, even if she tried to hide it. He knew panic would make the situation worse. He held her hand, squeezing gently, murmuring encouragement. He reminded her that she was not alone, that she could survive this, that her child could survive this. Each word was a lifeline. The first contraction ended, and she gasped, shivering violently. He pressed a hand to her forehead, feeling the ice-cold sweat that had formed in the bitter wind. Her breath came in short, rapid bursts. He realized they could not wait any longer. The baby was coming, and the storm would not wait for them to find a safer place. He had to act here, with what they had. The warrior had learned long ago that survival was not about perfect conditions. It was about courage, quick thinking, and determination. He had all three. He gathered snow and shaped a small enclosure around them, enough to block some of the wind. Then, using his coat and layers of cloth he carried, he created a makeshift bed, padding it with everything he could spare to keep her from direct contact with the frozen ground. He whispered to her the whole time, speaking in soft, low tones. He told her to breathe slowly, to stay calm, to focus on one moment at a time. It was all he could do. The contractions came closer together now, sharp and relentless, and the woman's body shook with the effort. The warrior thought about what had been passed down to him by elders and family. He remembered lessons about childbirth in winter, about keeping warmth, about keeping calm, about the importance of patience. Everything became instinct. He adjusted her position carefully, using his hands to guide her gently. He reminded her to relax her shoulders, to focus on breathing. Each piece of advice, each careful adjustment mattered. In the middle of the storm, it was all they had. Time stretched. The snow continued to fall, thick and heavy, reducing visibility to almost nothing. The wind screamed across the plains, but the small hollow became a bubble of relative safety. He blocked her from the worst gusts and continued speaking softly, every word a thread connecting them to life. She grasped his arm with the little strength she had, focusing on his presence, the warmth, the voice. It gave her something tangible, something solid, in a world that had become chaotic and hostile. Another contraction hit, stronger and faster than the last. The woman cried out softly, a sound swallowed quickly by the wind. He placed a hand over her heart, feeling the frantic beat beneath his palm. He reminded her to stay steady, to breathe, to trust him. She nodded weakly, tears frozen on her cheeks. He could feel her tension, and he did his best to ease it, shifting her slightly, cushioning her with layers of cloth, whispering words of reassurance. The baby was coming. The moment of truth had arrived. He could see the fear in her eyes, the uncertainty, the strain. He did not flinch. His own heart raced, but his face remained calm. He focused entirely on what he could do for her. Survival was never about chance alone. It was about knowledge, courage, and will. He moved with care, guiding her through each wave of pain, speaking softly, keeping her focused. She listened because she had no choice but to trust him, and because she could feel he was entirely committed to keeping them both alive. The first signs of the baby's arrival were faint, almost imperceptible. He watched, guiding her gently, helping her with each movement. Snow covered the ground around them. The wind lashed against them, and still, life fought its way into the world. He whispered encouragement to her, telling her how strong she was, reminding her that the child was almost here. She clung to his words like a lifeline, drawing strength from his calm determination. Minutes passed in a blur. He adjusted her position again, supported her carefully, and reminded her to focus on one breath at a time. Every moment felt like an eternity. The baby moved lower, and he felt the small, miraculous weight of new life pressing against him. He whispered words of hope, grounding her, anchoring her mind and body in something steady amidst the storm. Fear remained, but it had a purpose now. It sharpened her focus, made her push when she needed to, made her hold on. Finally, after what felt like endless struggle, the baby emerged. The sound of life, tiny but clear, cut through the storm. The warrior's eyes glistened despite the cold, a mix of relief and awe. He gently cleaned the child, wrapped it in layers of cloth, and pressed it close to the mother, sharing warmth. She cried softly, a sound that was half exhaustion, half joy. Against impossible odds, they had survived this first, most critical moment. The baby was alive. She was alive. And he had kept his promise. He stayed with them, making sure mother and child were warm and as safe as possible. He checked her breathing, her pulse, the tiny heartbeat of the newborn. Each small sign of life was a victory. The snow continued to fall. The wind continued to howl. But in that hollow, life had won a small but monumental battle. Hours passed slowly. He held the baby against the mother's chest, whispering reassurances, sharing warmth. The woman drifted between exhaustion and consciousness, but she knew he was there. That knowledge gave her strength. She could not move yet, but she could trust that she would survive. She could trust that the baby would survive, and she could trust him because he had promised. He did not let her fall asleep completely. Sleep could mean hypothermia in this storm. He adjusted their positions, using his own body heat to protect them. He murmured stories, words from his own people, words meant to keep hope alive. The baby stirred slightly, comforted by the steady presence of both parents and the warmth that wrapped around them. The small life depended on his vigilance, and he gave it willingly, fully, and without hesitation. As night approached, the storm began to ease slightly, though the cold remained. He knew they were not safe yet, but the worst had passed. He stayed with them, keeping the baby warm, helping the mother regain some strength, and ensuring that both of them could survive the night. His promise had carried them this far, and he intended to carry them farther still. He understood that survival was not only about what the body could endure, but also about what the heart and mind refused to surrender. He watched them both, quietly, vigilantly, until the storm finally began to lessen and the first pale light of dawn touched the plains. In that moment he allowed himself a brief sigh of relief. The woman opened her eyes slowly and looked at him with gratitude. She could not yet speak. The baby nestled against her chest, small and warm. Life had returned, fragile but unbroken, into the frozen world. The first light of dawn spread slowly across the plains, pale and soft, cutting through the lingering haze of the storm. The wind had quieted, though the cold remained sharp and biting. The Lakota warrior knew that survival had been earned, but the journey was far from over. Mother and child were alive. Yes, but the frozen plains still held danger. He had kept his promise through the night, and he would keep it until they reached true safety. He looked at the woman. Her face was pale, exhausted, and streaked with frozen tears, but her eyes held life. She had survived the impossible. She looked down at the small bundle in her arms. the tiny newborn, warm against her chest, breathing steadily despite the freezing world outside their small shelter. He had expected relief, yes, but also fear. Every step forward now would be slow and uncertain, yet he could not rest. Not yet. The plains waited for no one. Carefully he helped the woman to sit upright. Every movement was gentle, deliberate. He wrapped additional layers around her and the baby, using every piece of cloth he could spare to protect them from the lingering cold. Her arms trembled as she held the child, and he whispered calm instructions, reminding her to breathe slowly and steadily. The baby stirred slightly, comforted by warmth and voice, small hands curling instinctively against her chest. Life, delicate but stubborn, had persisted. The warrior rose first, scanning the horizon. The snow covered the plains in a thick, unbroken blanket. Familiar landmarks were hidden, and the land stretched endless and empty in every direction. Even with the storm passing, each step forward could lead them astray. But staying in one place was equally dangerous. Hypothermia, frostbite, and exhaustion still threatened. The only choice was to move, step by step, slowly, carefully, but always forward. He extended a hand to help the woman stand. She grasped it, shivering violently. Relying on his strength, he supported her as they began the journey again. Each step was measured, deliberate. The snow was deep, sometimes reaching above their ankles. The baby was nestled against the mother's chest, wrapped in layers that barely kept it warm enough. The warrior's breath came in clouds. His own body chilled, but he did not falter. His focus was absolute. The promise he had made in the storm was not yet complete. The cold gnawed at them. Every gust of wind stole warmth. Every step took effort. The plain seemed endless, stretching in every direction, white and empty, as if the world had been reduced to snow alone. Yet the warrior pressed forward. He spoke occasionally, softly, not to fill the silence, but to remind them that they were alive. Words carried weight in moments like this. They were threads of hope, fragile but real, tying them to the world they had not yet left behind. The woman tried to speak, to thank him, but her voice was weak. She shook her head instead, acknowledging his presence and guidance. He understood. Words were unnecessary. Actions mattered more. The baby moved slightly, a small stir that reassured them both. Life was stubborn, refusing to be defeated by cold or fear. They were surviving inch by inch, step by step, because someone refused to give up. The terrain became uneven. Snowdrifts hidden beneath fresh layers made each step uncertain. The warrior guided them carefully, finding the firmest ground, avoiding hidden dips that could trip them or bury them deeper in the snow. He paused often, letting the woman rest, holding her steady when her legs wobbled, keeping the baby close and warm.
Every motion was careful, deliberate. Every pause was necessary.
They could not rush. Life depended on patience now. As hours passed, the woman grew weaker. Her exhaustion was profound, and the cold had left its mark on her body. Yet her determination remained. She drew strength from the warrior's unwavering presence. She had survived the storm, the labor, and the freezing night. Now, survival became a question of endurance and trust. Each step forward was a battle, and yet they moved, slowly, steadily, through the endless whiteness. At one point they came across a small cluster of trees, bent and twisted by the storm, offering slight shelter from the wind. It was not much, but it was enough for a brief respite. The warrior guided them under the branches, shielding them from the worst gusts. He knelt beside the woman, checking her pulse, and whispered words of reassurance. He adjusted the baby in her arms, making sure it remained warm and safe. Even in this brief pause, vigilance was necessary. There was no room for carelessness. She looked at him, eyes wide with gratitude and exhaustion. He nodded, saying nothing.
Actions spoke louder than words.
He offered her a sip of water he had carefully preserved in a small container. The cold had thickened it slightly, but it was better than nothing. She drank slowly, savoring the warmth, then leaned against him, trusting him to support her weight. The baby stirred again, small hands moving instinctively, seeking warmth and comfort. Life continued, fragile but unbroken. They resumed their journey after the brief pause. The snow was still deep and the terrain uneven. The warrior guided them around hidden obstacles, over frozen streams and through drifts that threatened to trap them. His own body was cold, fingers stiff and aching, but he pushed through, driven by the promise he had made. Step by step they moved forward. Every step was a test of endurance, every breath of victory against the harsh world around them. The sun rose higher, though it offered little warmth. Shadows stretched long across the snow, highlighting the emptiness of the plains. They had been moving for hours, yet the destination was still unclear. The warrior relied on memory and instinct, recalling paths he had traveled before, signs in the snow, patterns in the wind. He guided them carefully, adjusting their pace, reminding the woman to rest when she needed it, keeping the baby close and protected. The storm had passed, but survival still demanded vigilance. As they moved, the woman began to speak softly, words almost lost in the cold air. She thanked him, expressing the gratitude she could barely form into sentences. He nodded, acknowledging her thanks with a simple glance. Words were not necessary between them now. Trust had been established through action. Life had been preserved through courage, determination, and an unbroken promise. The baby, sensing the presence of warmth and safety, rested against her chest, breathing steadily. Each small breath was a triumph, proof that life had persevered against impossible odds. The warrior continued to speak softly, sharing stories of survival, of hope, of courage. His words were small threads, weaving strength and comfort into the fragile lives he carried. The woman listened, drawing strength from them, knowing that each step forward was guided by someone who would not let them fail. Hours passed. The snow began to thin slightly, and distant shapes appeared on the horizon. Trees, hills, perhaps even signs of human habitation. The warrior did not allow himself to hope too early. He focused on the immediate task, keeping them moving safely, keeping them warm, and keeping life alive. Every pause, every adjustment, every careful step mattered. One misstep could undo everything they had endured. He could not allow that to happen. Finally, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the snow, they saw signs of life. Smoke rising from a distant building, faint but unmistakable. Relief surged through the woman and warrior alike. Safety was within reach, though still requiring careful movement. He guided them steadily, encouraging her with gentle words, supporting her when her legs faltered. The baby stirred, sensing the nearing warmth of human shelter, responding instinctively to the presence of protection and life. When they finally reached the building, exhausted and frozen but alive, the woman collapsed against the doorway, clutching the baby tightly. The warrior stood beside her, hands still numbed by cold, heart still racing from the effort. They had survived. Against the blizzard, against exhaustion, against fear, life had won. The promise he had made in the storm had been fulfilled, and in that moment he allowed himself a small, quiet smile. Survival was not easy, but it was possible. And sometimes all it took was courage, determination, and the refusal to give up. The building they reached was small, but it was warm. Smoke rose gently from its chimney, and the light inside glowed softly through frosted windows. The woman stumbled across the threshold, carrying her tiny newborn as if her very life depended on it, which in truth it had. The Lakota warrior followed closely, supporting her when her legs weakened. The door closed behind them with a soft thud, shutting out the cold and the storm that had held them captive for so long. For the first time in hours, they felt the kind of relief that goes beyond words. The relief of being safe, of surviving against impossible odds. Inside, people rushed to help. Blankets were spread, hot water was offered, and warm clothing was given to replace the wet, frozen layers they had endured. The woman wrapped her arms tightly around the baby, instinctively shielding it from the chill, while the warrior stood quietly beside them. He refused to take the warmth for himself, letting others tend to the mother and child first. His hands were stiff and red from the cold, but his presence was steady. He did not speak much. He did not need to. His actions had already spoken volumes. He had kept his promise, and that was enough. The woman's eyes met his, wide with gratitude and awe. She tried to speak, to thank him, but words failed her. Instead, she simply nodded, and her eyes shone with tears of relief and appreciation. The baby stirred against her chest, tiny fingers curling instinctively as though recognizing the safety that now surrounded them. It was a moment of quiet triumph, one born from courage, determination, and unwavering care. In that room, the storm outside seemed distant, almost unreal, replaced by the warmth of life and the promise that had been kept. The people inside the building were astonished when they heard the story. They listened carefully as the woman described the blizzard, the cold, the desperate journey, and the bravery of the warrior who had saved them both. Many found it hard to believe, but the evidence was right there in the faces of mother and child, and in the warrior's steady presence. It was a story of survival, of resilience, of the extraordinary lengths one person could go to keep a promise. The room was filled with awe, not only for the warrior's courage, but for the stubborn life of the newborn who had come into the world under impossible conditions. As the mother regained strength, she began to care for the baby with cautious attentiveness, learning to navigate the tiny movements, the fragile breaths, and the soft cries that marked a new life. The warrior stayed close, offering guidance when needed and keeping a watchful eye on both of them. He did not impose himself, but his presence was a quiet reassurance that they were not alone, that they had someone who would not let danger touch them again. His promise had been fulfilled, yet he remained vigilant. Survival, he knew, required continued care and attention, not just courage in a single moment. Days passed, and the woman recovered steadily. Her strength returned, though she remained cautious and protective of her newborn. The baby thrived, tiny but strong, wrapped in layers of warmth and love. The warrior stayed nearby, ensuring that the transition from the harsh frozen plains to this safe space was smooth and secure. He taught her how to protect the child from cold, how to maintain warmth, and how to keep hope alive in uncertain times. His lessons were simple, rooted in experience, yet they carried the weight of life and death knowledge. Each instruction was a reminder of the promise he had kept and the responsibility that came with it. The woman began to share the story with those around her, slowly, carefully. She spoke of the storm that had threatened to take her life, the pain and fear she had endured, and the extraordinary bravery of the warrior who had carried her and her child to safety. People listened with rapt attention, many struggling to imagine the harsh conditions she had faced. Yet the story was not just about suffering. It was about hope, courage, and the unbroken chain of care that had saved 2 lives. Each retelling reinforced the reality that survival is often built on compassion and commitment, not just luck. As the days turned into weeks, the woman and child became stronger, more confident. The warrior remained a constant presence, though he rarely spoke of himself or his own hardships. His focus was always on them, on keeping the promise he had made in the storm. The bond between the 3 of them grew, silent but profound, a connection forged in the harshest conditions imaginable. Trust had been established through action, through sacrifice, through unwavering attention. It was a trust that would not fade with time or distance. Eventually, the woman began to plan for the future. She knew that life outside the shelter would be difficult, but she was determined to face it with her child by her side. The warrior offered guidance, helping her navigate the challenges that lay ahead, sharing knowledge of the land, of survival, of resilience. She listened, absorbing every word, knowing that each lesson was a gift born from experience and care. Together they created a path forward, one step at a time, built on the foundation of the promise that had saved them. The child grew healthy and strong, nurtured by the love and dedication of the mother, and the guidance of the warrior who had saved their lives. Each small milestone, first smile, first step, first word, was a celebration, a reminder of the resilience and determination that had carried them through the storm. The warrior watched quietly, proud but humble, knowing that the life he had helped preserve was the true reward. Recognition was unnecessary. The fulfillment of his promise was enough. Years later, the story spread. People spoke of the pregnant woman lost in the blizzard, the Lakota warrior who refused to let her die, and the promise that had changed everything. Some doubted the details, finding the events almost too extraordinary to believe. Yet the mother and child knew the truth. They lived it every day. The warrior's courage, the determination to keep a promise, and the unbroken chain of care had created a legacy that no storm could erase. The story was no longer just about survival. It was about hope, resilience, and the extraordinary power of human compassion. The warrior himself never sought fame or recognition. He returned to his life quietly, his actions uncelebrated by the wider world, yet monumental to those whose lives he had saved. He understood that true heroism is often silent, measured not in accolades or attention, but in the fulfillment of promises and the preservation of life. The mother and child carried his lessons forward, sharing them with those who would listen, ensuring that the knowledge of courage, survival, and compassion would continue to ripple outward. Each act of care, each moment of guidance, became part of a living legacy. The mother often reflected on the journey, the storm, and the promise that had changed everything. She thought of the fear, the pain, the exhaustion, and the moments when hope seemed impossible. And yet, she also thought of the quiet bravery of the warrior, the way he had moved through the storm, and the strength of the human spirit that had refused to surrender. The story became more than an account of survival. It became a lesson, a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, life could persist when compassion and courage guide the way. The child grew up with the story, not as legend, but as truth. From a young age, they understood the weight of that first promise, the promise that had preserved life in the face of death. The child learned the importance of trust, of care, and of unwavering determination. The warrior's actions became a guide, a quiet example of what it meant to be responsible for another's life, to act selflessly, and to honor commitments no matter the difficulty. These lessons became a cornerstone of the child's life, shaping character, decisions, and perspective. Even as the years passed, the mother and child never forgot the storm or the warrior's courage. They returned occasionally to the plains, not out of necessity, but as a pilgrimage of remembrance. The land that had once been hostile now held meaning, a reminder of survival, resilience, and human kindness. Each visit strengthened their appreciation for life and the bonds that had preserved it. And they always remembered the promise, the quiet, unwavering commitment that had turned a desperate situation into a story of hope. The story continued to be shared, not for fame, but to inspire, to teach, and to remind others of the extraordinary things humans can do for one another. It became a story of courage in the face of fear, of life preserved against impossible odds, and of promises kept even when the world seems determined to break them. People who heard it felt the weight of the journey, the danger of the blizzard, and the quiet heroism of a man who refused to abandon those who depended on him. It was a story that reminded everyone that one act of bravery, one promise kept, could ripple outward and change multiple lives forever. The warrior, meanwhile, lived quietly, never claiming recognition, never expecting thanks, yet the impact of his actions was profound, touching lives in ways he could never have measured. The mother thrived, raising the child with the lessons of courage, care, and resilience passed down from the man who had saved them. And the child grew to understand the extraordinary gift of life, the responsibility that comes with survival, and the legacy of human compassion. The promise that had been made in the middle of a blizzard continued to shape lives long after the storm had passed, reminding all who heard the story that courage, care, and determination can endure even the harshest conditions. Life went on. Seasons changed. The plains thawed and bloomed. Yet for those who survived the storm, every moment was imbued with the memory of that night. The blizzard, the fear, the pain, and the unwavering courage that had carried them through. And though the warrior remained humble and the story passed quietly at first, its message spread farther than any one of them could have imagined, that human life is precious, that promises carry weight, and that acts of courage and compassion can truly change the world, one life at a time,